There was a man named Waters Holland. He had a son, Asa Holland. He had a son, John Holland. He had a son, Perry Holland. He had a daughter, and here is me, Jestene Holland. My mother was a Goforth, and her ancestors were a lot in the church building. There was Reverend William Goforth, Reverend Smith Goforth, Thaddeus Goforth, my mother Gertrude. On my daddy's mother's side, and also on my mother's side, if you want to know what's wrong with me, my parents were related. Tapley Redmond was a very wealthy man, and how he got to be wealthy, his bride went to stay with a rich old gentleman to take care of his wife. And she died shortly, and Tapley married her. He married into a lot of money, a lot of slaves, and he had a lot of children. One of the children was named Louisa. She was a twin. Her twin was Louisa. And Louisa was my father's mother. Also, Tapley Redmond had a son, and his name was Jose. And he became my great-grandfather on my mother's side. So that's why I'm as peculiar as I am. My folks were kin. And my mother and daddy were married 13 years. They were unsuccessful in having a child. So they adopted my wonderful sister, Ozelle. She was 3 years old. And Mama said she thought she was the most beautiful child that she ever laid her eyes on. And she made a wonderful sister. And we grew up together a little while. I can remember a few things about my daddy, not very much, but I can remember how much I cared for him, and I can remember how much I wanted to be like him. And anything that he ate, I wanted to eat it. He was bad about cooking little odd things, and he liked to roast them in the fireplace. He had a spit, and he'd roast rabbits and birds and good pieces of out of a hog when you killed it. I thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world. And
phone ringing. Okay.
And he would cook it in the fireplace on the spit. And of course, you know, it made grease in the fireplace. And Mama just hated that. She didn't like for him to do that at all. And she wouldn't eat a bite of it, and neither would Ozelle. But I loved every bite of it. He'd go out in the winter and catch me a bird and roast it, or a rabbit and roast it, and I'd eat with him just as long as there was a piece there. And then I can remember going to Statesville with him in the open T model. And I remember we'd always park in what they call the back lot. And I was always so proud to be with him. And he was a teacher. He had taught for about 12 or 14 years before him and Mama got married. And he was always in control of our schooling. And my first day of school was on my birthday. It was the 22nd of August. I was 6 years old. And the night before, the evening before, Daddy killed a partridge. Mama dressed it, and that's what I had for breakfast my 6th birthday. Daddy took me to school, and he also picked up Polly Daniels. It was a neighbor. That was her first day in school. And I can remember being in the classroom, and of course Daddy felt very at home in the classroom. And he was up talking to the teacher, which was Mrs. Jenny Rash. And by the way, my son, first grade teacher, was her daughter, Winona. And I felt so proud that my daddy was up there talking to the teacher. I just felt really important. And then it got time for us to leave. And why Polly didn't go home with us, I don't remember. But she didn't come home with us, and she cried the rest of the day. When we got home, there was curing a barn of tobacco, and Mama was staying with the tobacco barn while Daddy took me to school. And she had killed a chicken and picked it and dressed it, cut it up, and had and she had broken a mess of green beans. And that's what I had for my 6th birthday dinner. Well, that was August the 22nd. Then it came January of that year, and Daddy had a terribly, terribly bad cold, and he had the open T model, and he and Matney Harmon, he was quite a young guy. Daddy, young guys catered to Daddy. There was always some of the Templeton boys, or the Dow boys, or the Bruce boys, or the Shaver boys, or the Williams boys, or the Harmon boys. Something like that was always at home. We had an old record player, which was new then, and they would come in and they'd play and they'd pick me up.
Is that the one y'all still have?
Yes, and they'd pick me up and dance with me. But there was just always young people there. Daddy really loved young people. And he loved to tell practical jokes too. And he did practical jokes. I remember one time, I don't remember it, but I've heard my mama tell it, that Reverend Carol Jordan, Bradley's teacher, grandfather, had a bale or two of cotton. And it wasn't bringing much when it came time to bale it. So he decided to bring the bales home with him and wait for the cotton price to go up. Well, a bunch of the neighborhood men, and my daddy was included, they decided they'd move them bales one night. And they just moved them around the corner, I think, from the house. They didn't take them off the place. They just moved them sort of out of sight. He got up the next morning and swore somebody stole all of his bales of cotton. And he went out to Luther Harmon's, in the store. Luther Harmon ran a store. And he hadn't opened up at that time, so he went on to the house, and he was so nervous and excited, he chewed tobacco, and he would stand with his back to the fireplace and spit out in the middle of the floor. And that just tickled my daddy to death. And this one is not so nice to tell, but Mama said he got so tickled. Back then, the mail was carried by a horse and buggy. And Mr. Gill was the one, he had married one of Daddy's cousins, and he was the mail carrier. So Daddy met him one day, and he said, Mr. Gill, said, did you hear about that baby that they found on the courthouse doorsteps? And Mr. Gill said, no. He said, yes, said they found it and they examined it and decided to come from the country. And Mr. Gill says, well, how in the world did they know it come from the country? And Daddy said, because he found a grass seed in its bottom. And said, Mr. Gill says, get up. And said, Daddy laid down on the grass and just rolled. But that was kind of the person he was. But then going back in January, he had a bad cold. And he and Matney Harmon, another one of the young boys, and he grew up and had a big store in Statesville. And they messed around together and raised some chickens together and tobacco and stuff like that. And they went to the tobacco market to sell a load of tobacco in that open T model. And when Daddy got back, he got back on Friday. And when he got back, I had gotten my report card that day.
Good.
It was really good, and I was so tickled because Daddy always bragged on me so.
Keep going.
And so I met him, and I run, and I jumped up on his neck, around his neck, and he was so sick. He pushed me down and said, "Get down from here." That just broke my heart. And that afternoon, we filled the tobacco basement just as full as it could stick with tobacco to work off for the next day, because Ozell and I both would be home from school. And
keep going.
And so in the night, he got really, really sick. And that afternoon, or it wasn't hardly good dark, he was hurting so bad, and his head hurt so bad. And he says, "Gert, get these kids to bed." Says, "They're just killing my head with this racket they're making." So we had to go to bed before hardly dark. Well, on over about midnight, 1 o'clock, he got very, very ill. And Ozell was 12 at the time. And Mama got her up, and lit the lantern and had her to walk over to Grady White's to go get the doctor. And that was on Saturday morning, and he died the next Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. I was sitting on the dining room table. There was a half-glass door between the bedroom and the dining room, and I was sitting on the dining room table watching Aunt Perry Holland churn. I saw the commotion in the room. I went in, and Daddy was dying. There was a bed at the foot of that bed. Mama fainted and fell across the bed. Dr. Myers was his doctor, and he'd done all he could. He had a registered nurse come from H.F. Long Hospital, which is now Ireland Memorial. Grady White went and got him for it. They did all they could, but he had double pneumonia, and he just died.
We'll take a break there.
Is that what you wanted to say?
Yeah.